Hi.
Hi, we're back.
Yes, we are.
Episode 3 already.
Whoop, whoop.
Can you believe it?
I cannot.
We are here.
We are.
Rigour Flow with...
Myself, Iwan.
And myself, Tamanda. And this is the show where business meets love.
And culture meets critique.
Yeah. Roots and Rigour, Rigour and Flow. Roots and Rigour, Rigour and Flow. Roots and Rigour, Rigour and Flow. Rigour and Flow.
One.
Just a quick note, we had a few audio issues with our phones buzzing while we were recording this one, so we've since learnt our lesson and put it on airplane mode, but you may need to bear with us. So, what are we doing this week?
Well, the format is changing. We are trying to work out our format in the open.
Yeah.
So we're trying a couple of different ways of doing the show. Mm-hmm. So the last 2 episodes were deep dives into a singular topic.
Yeah.
Whereas this episode is going to be 3 topics.
Yeah.
Where I bring something to the table from either my area of expertise and industry or something I love, something I've been watching, I'm inspired by, and you do the same. Mm-hmm. And then the final segment will be something from our audience, our family, our friends, questions that they want answered essentially.
Or just themes they want to hear our take on, like that they've been thinking about and want to... just have a bit of a more public conversation about. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I'm excited that we get to talk about stuff from our industry, but also that we get to like throw off some shackles and do a bit more freeform stuff because shackles. I have a lot of guilty pleasures.
I know you have a lot of guilty pleasures and I can't wait for the audience to hear about them.
Yeah, I can't wait to. It's just gonna... my love of trash TV will have a space to live somewhere in the public domain.
I love it.
All right. So what are you bringing today?
So I recently attended a script writing workshop with the incredible Script Yorkshire. And it was led by the extremely talented Lisa Holdsworth, who has written for all the major shows in the UK, from Emmerdale to Waterloo Road and Call the Midwife. So she was talking, she used Call the Midwife as an example for elements of script writing and specifically script editing. Mm-hmm. And I think she's a brilliant writer. So when she spoke about Call the Midwife, I thought, got to watch that show to see her work in action. So she wrote some of the episodes. I was pleasantly surprised to discover that the show had actually been going for over 12 years. Yeah. So I think the first series came out in 2012 and there are 14 seasons in total. So we dived in.
Yeah.
And we found that we both liked it, sometimes for similar reasons, but also for different reasons.
Yeah. What would you say your reasons for liking it were?
For me, I like history. And specifically, I like London history because I am from London. Mm. So the show is set in the East End of London in the 1950s. In a very poor area called Poplar. Mm-hmm. And it tackles head-on issues of poverty, migration, the baby boom. I mean, some of those families had record numbers of kids. You remember that one woman who had 14 children?
Yeah, exactly. And it was very much, in a way, watching it with you, it's been really interesting because my mum is one of 14 and the way that birth even happens on that show feels... very similar, very much more similar to stuff I've encountered back home in Southern Africa. So but that's by the way.
Absolutely. I mean, my mum's one of 8 and it was the baby boom, right?
Yeah.
And very much in those communities, birthing happened in the community. So the doctors and nurses, as you'll see in the show, if you choose to watch it, were very much embedded in those communities. Mm-hmm. So they are going to the homes of these women. The women are having their babies in the homes, so much so that at one point they tried to create a maternal care clinic for women to go there to have their babies. And there was quite a strong resistance from the women. Yeah. I'm not having my baby in a hospital. I'm having my baby at home, like my mother and my grandmother and my great-grandmother, you know?
What fascinated me about it, I mean, you were coming at it from a script point of view.
A creative perspective, absolutely.
Exactly. And I'm coming at it as a researcher. Mm-hmm. So over the last few years, I've found myself working quite a lot in the maternal health space and within Black maternal health specifically. Mm-hmm. And it was just a really interesting historical look at what's changed within healthcare and the point when births went from happening in community to within hospital settings and really the increasing medicalization of birth. So a lot of the stuff that's come up in the research that I've done is women feel like they have to have things like medical inductions pushed on them where, it's much easier to control how a birth happens when a woman goes into labor because there's a medical intervention.
Yes.
And so you are watching in sort of this throwback historical look at how did communities respond to this, and actually much of the resistance they were kind of pushing back onto the system then is similar stuff to what's happening now. So I found that fascinating. Right?
Absolutely, which is why we've seen the rise of doulas, birth doulas, who are sort of going back to the birthing practices of our foremothers, where they're going to women and giving them the option and the right space and medical support.
It's like almost pastoral support and emotional support and
Yes.
spiritual support, like that knowledge
Absolutely.
transfer from one woman who's had a baby or seen many babies birthed to a woman who may be doing it for the first time or maybe the umpteenth, you don't know. But
Exactly. Yeah.
it's definitely a role that we're seeing more and more happening. Okay, so you're bringing Call the Midwife. What is it about this show that you wanted to dive into?
Before I even get into that, I think it goes without saying that I think the show is incredibly brilliant.
Yeah.
It's well researched. It's beautifully shot. The acting is on point. The writing is on point. And I really love the show and I really appreciate all that it is.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that came up for me was in the very first season. And obviously that would have been some 12 years ago. So again, another caveat.
Okay. Many caveats.
Well, a lot of caveats.
Okay.
But what I remember...
Spit it out.
No, I know, I've got to spit it out. You know me and diplomacy. So in the very first season... there's an episode with a storyline where a white working class woman is about to have a baby with her husband, who's a white working class man.
Yeah.
Now, she's been married before and she had children from that marriage before. But that husband, for whatever reason, is no longer a part of her life. They're divorced. And so this new husband has taken her as his wife at a time where there was great stigma for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? To be a divorced mother, it's almost like you're on the rubbish heap at this point.
Yeah.
Just get on with raising your kids and then go off and die, essentially.
Yeah.
So she is really grateful for this guy who's really loving, takes her children as his own, and she's about to have this baby. So that's the scenario. As we get closer to her giving birth, we start to sense some tension with her around it. She's really reluctant to have this baby. And she's not happy in the way mothers generally are in that series to have their babies. She then divulges to the nurse as she's on the birthing bed. She divulges and says, look, I had an affair.
Yeah.
With a guy from the docks.
It was a one night only thing.
It was
she
a one
describes
night,
it as.
one night only.
Oh, one night only.
So
I'm not sure I believe that part of the storyline, but
I'm
anyway.
not sure about that. But she has a one night only thing with this guy from the docks. The problem is the guy from the docks is black. So he's obviously come from one of the ships because, you know, there were African-American sailors who came through and so on and so forth. Popular, by the way, is on the docks, which is why they were close to the dock workers. So she essentially is concerned that the baby is going to come out black. At this point, we don't know whose the baby is. So
who the baby daddy is.
Who the baby daddy is.
Right? We don't know who the baby daddy is.
Baby daddy is.
Yeah.
It could come out white.
Yeah.
Or it could come out mixed race.
Yeah.
And herein is where the story gets a little bit interesting because she starts to give birth to the baby and with all those shots in Call the Midwife, she's howling and groaning and grunting and her legs are up and it's that perfect shot where you don't see anything of her private parts, but you do see the head emerge.
Yeah, yeah.
And as the head emerges, you and I are suddenly gripped by...
Yeah, we thought we were waiting. This labor is going on.
Yeah.
It's, you know, she's howling and
Oh,
mooing
yeah.
and all the things women do on that show.
Yeah.
And we're
It's
thinking
the soundtrack of the show, actually.
It is. And we're sitting there thinking, okay, how is the husband going to react? We're looking for his reaction. It's a bit tense.
But we also don't know if the baby's going to be...
Well, this is the point. We're
Yeah.
trying to figure out, is
Yeah.
this baby going to be white or are they going to be mixed race? And we're waiting for the husband's reaction and the mother's reaction to that. Is it going to be relief because the kid's white and she doesn't have to divulge this one night only secret? But then the baby comes out.
And the baby was blacker than me.
It's true. So
And we both just looked at each other like,
What's just happened? We were completely pulled out of the
We were
story
pulled out.
in a way.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. I'm curious to know how you see that as a director, because you don't want your audience being pulled out of the
you
story.
want to keep them in the world. Nothing should pull them out. The sound shouldn't pull them out in terms of bad sound or bad sound design choices, music choices. The shots shouldn't pull people out. Like, nothing should pull your audience out of that world. Now,
Casting.
maybe we were pulled out of it because of our identity as Black people. Because it just seemed so glaringly obvious that baby, regardless, should not have come out like that.
There was
Which then-
nothing mixed race about that baby.
Nothing.
Even if you had one of those one-off Luke throwback genes coming out, there was nothing in the script to indicate that was coming,
Well, this
or
is
to
it.
explain that it had happened or something.
This is it, because this is a series that deals with medical and genetic issues. In subsequent episodes, there was a baby born with spina bifida, and there was an open wound on the baby's back when it was born, and there was spinal fluid leaking out. And obviously everyone was just like, what is going on? And then, of course, that is an anomaly because the majority of babies born don't have spina bifida, right? So there's a thing there that needs to be discussed. And they discuss it and they talk about spina bifida. And we actually go to a home that was created to care for children who have those kinds of disabilities, right? So for my thing is, if it was a fluke, a genetic throwback, maybe her great-grandmother or her mother had some Black in her and it came through this baby, you would expect a discussion as to why is that baby Black?
Yeah.
And then it'll be a feature and it'd be fine, great. So
Yeah.
we're pulled out for a moment, but then you explain.
So my thing is, as someone who doesn't work in your industry, like how did that even happen from a casting perspective? Like, how does casting even work in general, let alone for babies?
Yeah, so casting is a very difficult job. And I have so much respect for casting agents, casting people, because it does happen with great difficulty. And so just for the audience, so casting is where you take the description of the characters in a script and you find actual actors to portray that character as close as you can to the script writer's vision of what that character should be. Casting babies, I imagine, I've never had to cast babies, but I have done casting work for other projects that I've worked on. Casting babies is even more difficult because you've got to get the size of the baby right. So it's a newborn baby, right? So you've got to find a baby in real life who's roughly the size of a newborn baby, but isn't a newborn baby, because you can't take a baby out of the hospital and just stick it on set with people handling it and putting gunk all over it.
Safeguarding nightmare.
Right?
Yeah.
So you've got to find a small enough baby that has, I imagine, the right temperament, because obviously if the baby's just screaming all the time, there's not a lot you can do, and you can't gag the baby, can you?
Oh no, God.
So do you know what I mean?
This episode's already taking a turn.
It's taking a turn for the worse. So there's a lot of complexities to casting for babies in particular. So casting, you would expect that to me personally, it would be quite obvious reading the script
Yeah.
that a mixed race baby is required.
Needs to be a mixed race baby.
It needs to be a mixed race baby
Okay,
for me personally, because it would have said, I mean, there's so many lines in there, right? She's a white woman and she's saying, I've had an affair with a Black man from the docks and I'm worried that the baby's going to come out Black.
I get that. Yeah, you would expect somebody to like cast in that way and look for those things. Like, how would that even happen? So one of the things I would notice or stuck out to me as a researcher, and a researcher who studies race specifically, is we know language around race changes. So at the time this thing was set, bearing in mind it's also based on a memoir, probably whether you were Black, whether you were mixed race, frankly, whether you were brown or Asian or someone, the population who was majority white often just called everyone black, right? So the same thing happened to me, or coloured, right? And the same thing happened to me, for example, when I went to Belfast, everyone just called me black, not black mixed race, which is how I identify, because they didn't have enough cultural awareness to understand the distinction between black and mixed race. So in a situation like that, what kind of information does the casting person receive? Is it possible they just saw a script that said white woman has black baby and they assume black meant black how we understand it today, as in fully black, or what's gone on there?
So the casting director would normally get the script.
Yeah.
So they've got all the context that surrounds that particular baby. So in that script, it would be very clear that this is a white woman who's had an affair with a black man and had a baby that ends up being black mixed race. They'd be able to join the dots.
They have the context. They're not just given us something that says black baby, so something might have not been translated from that era till now.
Precisely. And on a show that's so well researched, like everything is well researched. The surroundings, the Nonata's house, so that's the house where all the nuns are. They're the ones who care for the women in the community, and actually they are the midwives.
Provide midwifery services,
absolutely.
Don't they?
Like everything is so well researched. It's spectacular. And then it was just in this one moment that just caught me off guard, because I would have thought that the research would have brought up that if a white person has a baby with a black person, the skin tone of that baby is significantly lighter than the skin tone of the baby that was eventually cast. But what I did love is that the father of the baby, well, he's not the father of the baby, he was...
Not biologically anyway.
Not biologically, but he took that baby and he said, that's my son. He held the baby with such tenderness and such love. It felt so genuine, so authentic. He was like, that's my son and this is my family and I'm happy to have this child in my life.
Yeah, and he was a lovely character. And I have to say, because we're talking about a thing that went wrong, in that storyline, it felt really genuine, because you could easily look at this white guy having a black mixed race baby at that time and be like, well, obviously he's not going to accept him. That's the most unrealistic writing. But no, that was his temperament. He was that way with his wife. And in the next season, there's another mixed race baby born and the father absolutely rejects it.
That guy is a demon.
He was a demon.
He was like, get rid of it. Not even her. Just get rid of it.
Yeah. So we do see in the series like a willingness to address race and racial mixing or miscegenation, as it would have been. This casting issue still boggles.
Yeah, I think, do you know what it is? It feels, to some people watching this, particularly if they're not of the black community, it feels like such a small thing. It's like, it's a baby. But actually for us as black people watching it, it pulled us out of the thing, because for us, that doesn't match what our understanding is of how black babies emerge. First and foremost, even if it's a dark-skinned baby, it never emerges dark-skinned.
That's true. If you're black, you generally, it takes us a while to grow into our shades. Like I came out like a white porcelain doll, right? Today I look mixed race. Back then my hair was fair. Well, no, my hair was fair. Not my skin was extremely, I looked white and I had like really quite straight, like wavy, but a massive head of hair. And I came out my mum's nanny like that, frankly. And people used to, I'm told, I obviously don't know, but I'm told.
But you were there.
I was there, but I couldn't see myself.
What, you didn't come out of a mirror?
No.
Oh, okay.
Damn it. But I do know, because this is how I know this story, that I came out like a little white doll, was that my mum used to push me around in a pram and people used to come up to her and think she was pushing a doll. What? Because I was also tiny, and people didn't think she was okay. They didn't think she was that stable, and they really thought she was pushing a doll round. So like I do know that to be the case, and obviously it's true, most black babies will come out, they come out looking mixed almost.
So much so that there are techniques that my mum and her friends and sisters would use to judge how dark the baby is eventually going to be. So they would look at two areas on the baby when it was born: the tips of the ears and this part of the nails, the bit that's just at the edge of the just below the fingernail.
Yeah. Like the cuticle,
skin,
just under the cuticle.
Yeah, the skin just below the cuticle. And if those two areas were dark, it meant that the baby was going to eventually be very, very dark. And of course, they were paying close attention because all of these women wanted to have light-skinned babies.
Yeah.
Fair, in my mum's words.
Yeah.
So much so that they would encourage women whilst pregnant to drink and eat certain things in order to make sure they had a lighter baby. Things like saffron milk. And there's even...
This is going on now still.
Even till today. Like if you go online and just search it, there are still African and Indian or Asian women
colorism
asking questions on forums like Quora and Reddit. What can I do to ensure that my baby is born light-skinned, even till today? And people give advice like avoid dark chocolate and all this stuff. But it's like, it's genetic. Your baby's either going to be dark or it's going to be light. It's based on the genes of you and the person who impregnated you.
Exactly. This is where I think it gets interesting, right, in this example, because it's these subtle things that often tell you who's done the casting, or who's written a script, or who's understood those nuances. Like, I'm not saying this would apply to Call the Midwives, but, you know, so often when we see ourselves as Black people represented on screen in the West, we are represented through the eyes of white people, through the white gaze, right? Not gays, the fabulous ones. No. The gays, as in the way we look.
G-A-Z-E.
To be clear. But yeah, so we are. So, you know, those little things that still happen to this day, like looking at the fingernails, looking at the tips of the ears, if you saw that represented on screen, as much as you don't want to see colorism,
it's accurate.
It would be accurate, and there would be something. It's often in those little subtle things that you realize that you're being represented by one of your own, because this obsession with the color of the baby is reflected and depicted in a way that, frankly, most communities who are white people for sure, they probably don't even know that happens. Right. That's a thing. So you could have a chance for some social commentary on it, or even if there's no social commentary on it, a furtive look between a midwife and a mother that's just given birth. That says something about the world that we live in.
Absolutely.
You know? That's the difference between something being as jarring as that scene was for us, and affirming it, even if not in the good ways, but one of my own has written this thing, directed this thing,
and they've
depicted
seen
this thing, and they've seen these
and ensured that we are seen
exactly through the tiniest of details and nuances,
because details are important. It'd be like, for example, not having the right air raid siren or something. If it was like set in World War II, it's almost like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing my dad would notice, honestly, because my dad grew up in post-war. Well, he was evacuated during the war from London, West London, albeit not East, and he lived through that. So he could watch that film and probably see what things are exceptionally well researched and that reflect his life. And he'd probably find, because of the way the thing is documented and the kinds of things that you can find in archive research because of who's archived the stuff that reflected his lived reality.
Absolutely.
Whereas for us, even though there's stuff in the archives, it probably doesn't include necessarily those nuances. 100%.
But in all fairness to the team, the next mixed race baby actually was mixed race.
That's true.
She was absolutely gorgeous.
We breathed a sigh of relief.
Yes.
Okay, from your point of view, what do you think the creators of the show could have or should have done? Like, how do you handle a situation like that?
I mean, I think it's very, very simple. We need representation behind the camera, not just in front of the camera. We need to be involved at the research stage. From the moment you've got a script that involves people of colour and stories that require that nuance, reach out, because we're there.
If you had been the exec producer on that show, or like the director on that show, and I don't understand how it would have happened. Presumably when there's casting, you send photos of the people you're casting before it gets all signed off. But let's just say for some reason you hadn't been involved, and then the baby that we saw in season 1 turned up on the day, or you saw the footage from the shoot and you hadn't been on set that day and that baby was in there. Would you have signed it off, or would you have required people to shoot again?
To be fair, casting should be done during pre-production. So you should have enough time to tweak things. Like normally the casting director or whoever's doing the casting would present images of the people they're thinking of using for the show. And then you as a team, the creative team, including the director, would say, yes, I'm happy with that person. Let's go with that person. Book this person. So I feel like there should be enough time to say no.
Yeah.
And say, let's go back to the drawing board. Also, on a high pressured show, I'd probably come with multiple
Casting options. Yeah.
And say, look, here's 4 babies that we've managed to source. Which one would you prefer? But then again, you've got availability and it's precarious with babies. I'm
wondering about that. Maybe they had a different casting and something went wrong.
And it went wrong.
And it's a very expensive mistake to fix when you've got everyone booked, right?
Yeah.
So if
sure
anybody has worked on Call the Midwife and knows the story of the jet black mixed race baby, I would love to hear what actually went down.
I would.
Absolutely. Maybe the casting director didn't live to tell the tale. Maybe they were sacked. Who knows?
No, I wouldn't want them to be sacked because the casting in general is just really good. And I really enjoy the series, to be honest. What are you bringing to the table in this episode?
Well, it's a total switch of direction for me. The thing that I have been fascinated to learn about was something called HillmanTok. Have you heard about it?
No, I think you may have shown something, but treat me as though I don't know.
Basically, there was this university professor in the States, her name's Dr. Leah Barlow, and she's a black educator who's definitely on the more left-leaning, progressive side of education. And she was setting up a class, preparing her curriculum for the term, I believe. And she decided that what she was going to do with her class was offer some of their learning via TikTok. And so she did a course introduction, knowing the demographic of her student group, and told the class what they'd be learning, only to discover overnight that they had had a ridiculous number of new subscribers and interest in this model of learning. And so that the aim was for her to make the learning accessible. And over 333,000 people ended up joining this class and then getting these, it's voluntary so that other black educators have come into it and they've ended up doing courses in 101 on herbalism or stuff around critical race theory or stuff around building generational wealth or just all manner of stuff led by black educators. So it's kind of become this online version of almost like historically black colleges and universities in America.
HBCUs.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, the reason I'm bringing that is because one of the things I love about what we're doing or the experiment that we are living in our 2 businesses is how can we make research and knowledge and data more accessible? And I feel like the game has really, really, really changed in a way that universities and many, many educators, myself, maybe peers, we're not keeping up to date on, right? Kids today are adults today, not just kids today, are consuming knowledge through short form content, an Instagram reel, a TikTok, small nuggets of bite-sized information that is often, there's a load of dis and misinformation out there as well, but there's also loads of really well-packaged information and knowledge that kids can learn. And I just feel like we're really not on top of this as educators and not making space to make our work accessible. And the demand, the fact that 333,000 odd people, more than that now, signed up, I think they say it was almost overnight, tells you everything.
That is incredibly powerful because it's one of the things that I've been saying over and over. You often hear lecturers, people at universities saying, these kids are writing their assignments with AI and all of this stuff and therefore AI needs to be banned. And it's like, well, no, if someone can do your course through AI, then maybe the course needs to change and the way that you teach the course needs to change. And so what I love about this is that it's using the tools of this generation to reach the people of this generation. And what I particularly love about it is that in this era of Trump basically dismantling the Department of Education, he can't dismantle TikTok.
Yeah. They tried.
They tried. They tried. But
tried.
for business interest, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so actually putting your stuff on that platform or a platform similar is the way forward. Now, of course, you can get banned, as we've seen, with certain businesses that don't align with the new agenda of anti-woke. But I like the fact that it's there as an alternative to the traditional institutions.
Yeah, completely. And I think for me, what I find so inspiring, I mean, you know this, but one of the things I'm really, really interested in is how we use those kinds of platforms ourselves, to share our stories, to build up new banks of data, even to share stories that these AI algorithms use. Like for Black communities, for any marginalized communities, very often our knowledge doesn't exist. But we've got sort of AI machines that are mining everything and everywhere for data, right? This was a point made by a woman called Fungi and Demera at a recent event. The point that was being made was that these large language models are out there mining data and mining information all the time. So if we don't feed those algorithms with our knowledge and accurate stories and authentic stories and content, including in short form, which we can all get on and do, we're at risk of, again, being written out of this moment, written out of histories, written out of systems that are starting to influence all kinds of practices, from healthcare to education systems to everything else in between. So I love the idea that an educator could go online on TikTok, taking all their hard-earned expertise and education and make what they do accessible to way more people than the institutions. And especially in a moment when higher education systems are under huge amounts of pressures.
Yeah. They're going bankrupt. They're closing whole departments. People are being made redundant.
In the UK, the redundancy situation right now
It's shocking. And I think it's something that I'd love to talk about on the show on an episode. Thinking about Dr. Leah Barlow's innovation in the education space, I have a question for you. So normally the route when you've done a PhD is to then get a position, I think, in a university and rise up the ranks, get tenure and all of that good stuff, become a professor. You did your PhD, December 2023.
I finished, yeah.
You finished, defended really well, no corrections, award for excellence, all that stuff. But you haven't chosen to go the academic route. What's the reason for that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that actually very few people go from PhD into an academic tenured position. It's really, really hard to get into academia. You have to expect lots of precarity, lots of fighting for your position. You get short-term contracts. There's a lot of things you have to do. And if you come in as a mature student like I did, and you've taken a very small stipend to complete your PhD, you're then committing to many more years of insecure employment to even get a foot in. And I say that because I'm not sure how much of it felt like a choice, If universities lived up to their rhetoric of saying they want diverse talent and they're willing to push for some of that change and take people who they felt had capabilities and make it a bit easier, I'd probably have considered it. But that was not the case. And so I've gone back to what I did before my PhD, which is consulting, and really, whilst I was in the final stages of my PhD, working within Black communities or marginalized communities to do research and knowledge-based initiatives, right? A lot of community research. And I think the more I've done that, the more excited I've become about questions like how we can make research accessible and impactful. And although there's a lot of talk in academia about impact and accessibility, in general, I'd say we are pretty poor at it. And so one of the reasons that I've wanted to toe this path and be on the journey that we're on is I'm really excited about what can happen at the intersection between media, communications, creative methods, and research. And I think that's what it is about the HillmanTok example that really excites me. It's showing that there really, really is this demand amongst people. And that's a thing I've seen in my projects with Black communities outside of the academy. The desire to do research, to collect data, to analyze data. It's huge.
So you're trying to go, it sounds to me, and obviously I've been watching you over the last year or so, that you want work that aligns with your values, reaches the communities that you are a part of and want to serve and champion and affect change in. And more importantly, you want more creativity to what you do beyond just being in a, let's face it, quite a staid and
feels a bit like a straitjacket.
Like a straitjacket of those institutions.
Yeah, and I fundamentally, I want the links with academia. My concern now is that I don't think people are convincing people to invest in it from the inside is the way forward. I think we've just got to create the model, show it, and then when people catch up or when something like HillmanTok happens, they suddenly go, oh, now we all, a load of universities in the UK saw that and around the world saw that, and now they're all like, we should be on TikTok. And it's like, you had to wait for Black people to innovate to bring us that before you jumped on board. So I'm not in the business of seeking people's permission. We've got to just do this and create the model and see where we can go.
The thing that I have no faith in with the academic institutions is their ability to get on TikTok and do it well. I'm not going to lie.
I look forward to the many attempts.
Yes, I do too.
Okay, so another lane switch for this final section of this episode. We're now going to talk through a question that we got asked by someone in our, network, in our community. And some context for that, we've been obviously doing quite a lot of thinking about our branding and how we show up online, because we've literally never thought about those things. We're the kind of people who randomly post something on LinkedIn, like...
As and when it happened, things happen.
Yeah.
Which I'm very okay with, but it's not...
Apparently it's not what you're supposed to do.
It's not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. So we do it sporadically. You have probably even more sporadically than me. You have now gone off Instagram because you just can't with that, right?
Yeah, I do post every so often.
Instagram?
Oh, on Instagram.
Yeah,
oh, no. Not me on Instagram. Instagram? No way.
You're
that
off.
Shit gives me bad mental health.
Exactly. And because you've gone off Instagram and a large portion of our relationship revolved around sending each other like fun, cute reels or hilarious things in wormholes, I think my incentive for being on there is less. Like I have a handful of friends that I send occasional reels to, but otherwise... Anyway, everyone's been saying, get your act together. And so we eventually thought, God, we should probably ask some experts. How are we supposed to do this thing of showing up online? One person that we've been speaking to, a guy by the name of Tayo, who runs an agency called Come Out of Your Shell, was talking through our own presence online, getting us to question what we felt was it communicated to other people. And in the process, he asked us this question, which was... Okay, I've looked at II Studios' website, which is our media production company. Would you do a documentary if the BBC approached you on Tommy Robinson? Like where he's involved your interview. It's not just about him, it's with him.
I would do it in a heartbeat.
Okay.
I'd do it in a heartbeat because as a company at II Studios, we know our values, we know where we're aligned. And so that documentary would be through our lens. And I would have no problem having a conversation with him because I feel as though I know who I am. I know what I stand for. I'm curious about him. And
You're curious?
Yeah, absolutely. The human behind the icon, I guess, because he is an icon of the far right. I know he probably disputes being labelled as far right. I've kind of watched some interviews with him and he doesn't really like that title.
Yeah, because his investment is being seen as like a common sense argument.
Yeah, and he is, in his words, he's a journalist.
Oh, is it? Is that how he describes himself?
He's a journalist, essentially.
I did not know that.
Honestly, when he said it, I was a bit surprised myself. But I would want to interrogate that. I'd want to find out who is the man behind this figurehead of the so-called far right. You know, I'd want to delve into his story, how he came to be who he is. What were the key moments in his life that led him to having the views that he has? What home did he come from? You know, who is he descended from? Who are the people around him? Who were his friends? Because one of the things he said in an interview that he did with Jordan Peterson is he talked about actually growing up around a lot of black kids, like those were his core friends. And he actually spoke about that. And he really resists this idea that he's somehow racist. He refutes that. So I'd want to dig a bit deeper into that, you know? One of the things as a creative, working in the sort of media, TV, any space where you are having to craft characters and craft stories, is you have to be able to see, A, both sides of the story. B, you've got to be able to, if you're going to craft a villain, you've also got to understand that not every villain is 100% villain. And that there are parts of them that are actually redeemable. There are parts of them that are very human and we can resonate with, certain drives, certain desires. And there are parts of them that are not villain to somebody else. To someone else, they are a hero. And that's how you create a well-rounded villain or a well-rounded character of any sort. And so I think because of the space in which I work and because I am primarily a documentarian, I'm always curious about the human condition. What makes us tick? What brings us to where we are? What is the roots of a person or a group of people? And what are the human points of connection between all of us that even I might be able to resonate with or relate to, even within someone like Tommy Robinson, who on the surface seems like the polar opposite because, you know, some people would call me left-leaning. I'm black. I'm LGBTQ+. I'm a woman, all of these things. So on the surface, it's like, well, actually, you're polar opposites. But actually, when I listen to his story, he's a working class guy. I grew up with guys like him. Working class white guys, white boys that I grew up with in school. I know their perspective. I've spoken to many of them. I've hung out with them. They've hung out at my house. We've done loads of stuff together, made music together, rapped together, been on the scene together as musicians. So there are points of connection that I think I would actually be able to see, even if a lot of his viewpoints for me, I find, in some cases, I actually find them quite repugnant, some of them, actually. So, but that's humanity.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, so when we were asked that question with an II hat, I guess I gave an answer that was an absolutely yes, but from a slightly different perspective to you and your why. Like, I always find it fascinating how you see the world as a storyteller. Like, that answer is just very different from how I would, I respect it actually, but it's very different from how I would see it. I think part of the reason why it feels important structurally for II to take on a story like that is the thing we've talked about so often when we're looking at our business strategy is that we tend to get pigeonholed, right?
God, yes.
You know, it's like you always say.
What is it? Black season, gay season, woman season.
Precisely. That's what happens. Commissioners tend to come to us when it's Black History Month, when it's International Women's Day week or month, because God knows it's either a day or week. I think it's just evolved into something else.
Nobody knows.
Or when it's Pride.
Yeah.
And you would think that we were devoid of perspectives on everyday social issues were it not for those 3 months of the year.
Because those social issues affect us.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine we should dare to have thoughts on other things happening in life and that you might want a different perspective on Tommy Robinson than whoever would. I mean, probably there's a lot of people who have a problem with platforming him. We're not talking about platforming. We're talking about doing something investigative.
So, and it's also a hypothetical.
It's a hypothetical.
Yeah.
But for me, I think I came at it as a bit of a hypothetical. Like, would we take on any issue? Yes, from our lens.
Absolutely.
Because it's in the public interest to have a range of perspectives and viewpoints or ways of understanding any number of people or issues or things that affect our society.
And the bottom line is, from his perspective and the people that he represents, which is largely white working class people, in towns and villages that the more dominant parts of society, like the more middle class, upper middle class people, specifically in London, have forgotten. I get that. They feel like they've been forgotten. They feel like they're not being heard. They feel like they're not being listened to. Whether you agree or you don't agree, they are a people who feel like nobody gives a shit about their perspective. And he speaks to that. You cannot ignore that. And if you ignore it at your peril.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see the ramifications of having ignored huge chunks of the population with the rise of Trump, with the rise of Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, and so on and so forth. We have to engage in dialogue. We have to.
Well, we can say huge chunks, though. It's really working class people, really, across the board.
But I feel like working class people of any society tend to be the hugest chunk because most of society is made up of the working people.
Yeah.
Right?
I just wanted to say that specifically because I think there's some people who might hear what you said and think you mean just white working class men, which is a factor,
it is a factor,
or white working class women for that matter. But what commonly is capitalised on by politicians or elites is that division between those working class people and black and brown working class people who are also being ignored over the same issues.
Absolutely.
You know?
Which is why I'm always saying that it is better to have unity amongst the working classes because there are much more of us and united we can do more together than this weird division that the politicians and the elites
exploit,
because then we're just in our community smashing each other's stuff up, whereas actually our issue comes from above. That asylum seeker whose house you're smashing can't change jack shit. What do you achieve by doing that other than just letting off some steam, right? That energy needs to be directed at the people in power. If there's something you're not getting from the system, you need to go to the seats of power. You need to lobby. You need to write letters. You need to protest outside the House of Parliament.
I guess that's what a lot of them people think they're doing when they're protesting. I mean,
yeah, they are, but there was a period last year where it was just like they were just attacking the most disadvantaged,
the racist riots
amongst us. Yeah,
definitely.
I'm just like, we need to be united. Working people are working people, regardless of whether you are white, whether you are brown, whether you are black. It doesn't matter. We're all struggling with the same issues, which is that our money doesn't go far enough. We are being taxed more. The rich are being taxed less, and we can't. Some people are having to choose between feeding their kids and putting lights on in the house. That is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with power.
Yeah, and class.
And class.
Yeah.
So that's my thing. So yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with those people. And one of the things I always say with commissioners, it's one of the reasons why I stopped doing panels, those discussions at those events, is because I don't want to talk about the usual shit. I already know what it is like to be black. I already know what it is like to be a woman and to be queer. I already know that. I want to talk about other things. I want to talk about how we tell our stories and why they're important. I want to talk about issues that affect me just as much as they affect a middle-class white guy. I want to talk about tech. I'm a tech nerd. I'm an audio engineer. I want to get on those panels and talk about those sorts of things. So the pigeonholing for me is something that I really push back on.
Yeah, no, for real. And I guess there's another angle that I come at this issue from. So the other reason I'm quite interested in the Tommy Robinson conversation is that I think a lot of people think about this guy and get into debates with people about this guy and they still talk about it like it's something big and out there. It's like part of this media conversation or this politics conversation. They don't realize just how much influence somebody like that has over the average person's life. I saw this so clearly when I was doing my PhD research, because I was doing this research into religion in the workplace, which also then started to focus on race. And I never forget, I was interviewing this one guy who worked within the fire service. He was a white Christian man. And you would think a white Christian man, a lot of privilege, he's going to be fine in that context. No, because of the fact that he was Christian and most people around him were non-religious. And to put it in his words, like the fire service is a pack mentality. Anyone who like deviates even a little bit out of the lines, they are subject to ridicule is the word he used, right?
And in what ways would you have deviated if you were there?
I mean, as simple as just be a woman. That's going to be a deviation. I know he told me the story of another ethnic minority colleague who came in with a curry that smelled.
But I swear curry is the national dish of this nation. Like, what?
You'd think, but I think maybe auntie's curry,
it's
the curry
strong.
from home is not the curry from down the road at the pub that also serves curry
that's
alongside
been watered down
a pint.
Watered down
your
for English
average
taste.
chicken bhuna or tikka masala, you know? So yeah, like it was that kind of thing that could get you in the firing line for the kind of banter that actually made your life a living hell and really was much more bullying. And one of the stories that he told me was how the supervisors in that particular fire service had essentially told him and his colleagues, and they were Tommy Robinson supporters, they talked and laughed around the mess table on a daily basis, which is the table where you gather waiting for an emergency, that if they could, they'd take their badger hunting rifles and go and shoot up Muslim majority areas. That was one of the things that was said as casual banter around the table. And I asked him, was it banter? And he said, no, I think they were serious. It's just that they know they could never get away with something like that. And as we continued talking, he then told me that one of his supervisors had apparently told people that if there were fires in Muslim majority areas, those people should take extra time, as in the fire staff should take extra time getting to those areas to increase damage to property. And you would presume potentially loss of life.
Wow.
So like the levels of Islamophobia, and you know, you can do great harm through sheer negligence. So it's imperative.
But I think even more to understand it, and even more to find ways to take apart that thinking and put more critical thinking into that dialogue, and also having that conversation, I think, is even more important. Rather than doing what we have done, which is almost shut it down, say that they're really bad, they're dumb, it's unintelligent, which just riles people up, gets their backs up. They become even more entrenched in those viewpoints. I want to understand it. I want to dispel some things, if I could, in what I'm doing. I want to contribute to that conversation.
Ditto.
Even more so, our voices are needed in that dialogue, not in our little pigeonholes where they like to put us, because I feel like that's another form of silencing.
100%.
You only talk about black stuff, like as if I'm not part of a wider society where those things affect me. I live in white working class neighborhoods. I grew up in them.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. And just one more thing on this, I will say that set of conversations happened probably in 2018. And since then, there was a big sort of report commissioned by the fire service into diversity issues within the fire service. And that got some major news coverage and clearly was highlighted as a big public interest issue. But
So there was data to back up what he was saying in terms of call-outs being delayed in order to increase...
Not that specific issue, but all
certainly
sorts of other ways in which the fire service and many other parts of public service, I know I heard similar stories in the army, in the Navy, those environments are very, very hostile to any minority. Really. And I'm not sure, not that I'm not sure, I'm fairly certain very little has changed. So this is, again, why we need these things to remain in the public imagination through media. And
everybody in society should be able to talk about everything in society.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, in answer to the question, would we take on a project in the media space or even in the research space around someone like Tommy Robinson? For you, yep. Research, I can think of many other issues that need highlighting that I'd quite like to talk about, but I think it's critical as well.
I think the conversation between black and white working class people, I think, is long overdue. And I think one that we need to have.
All working class people. And it depends how you're defining black there.
All working, God.
Yeah. Whatever the researcher, babe. You can't make a simple statement without me qualifying it.
As always, if you have a question for us, get in touch with us at rigourandflow@gmail.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear any questions you have, and we'll answer them in a future episode. And we would love to get any feedback on this new format that we've got, and whether you like it or whether you prefer the deeper dives into a single topic. Because like we said, we're kind of working out in the open and figuring it out as we go along. So thank you so much.
Till next time.